Kristen, and you're listening to Podcast and Amplify, a podcast for women entrepreneurs who want to amplify their voice and brand through podcasting and grow a wildly successful business. I'm the executive producer and host of 2 shows and an entrepreneur, and I love helping women grow their visibility, mindset, and business to the next level. Each week, I share tips on how to launch and leverage your podcast, and I'm bringing on the very best business leaders to give you advice on how to build your business empire. Let's amplify your voice and business. Hey there, welcome back to Podcast and Amplify. Today, I'm just so excited about the conversation that I'm about to have with our lovely guest. Communication is really important to me. It's what I spent my whole career on. And at the same time, I know that certain scenarios can trip me up. And so I'm always interested to learn more. And our lovely guest today, Vaneese Johnson, is here to share all of her wisdom around strategies for having those really crucial conversations when you're in conflict, and just how to be a better communicator in general. And I think we're going to go pretty deep today, which I'm excited about, but let me share a little bit about her background. She is the Boldness coach, which means she is an empowerment coach. She's a truth teller. She's a transformation instigator. Ooh, I love that. And she helps women to claim their boldness and get clear about becoming the woman that she was always meant to be. So welcome, Vaneese, to the show.
Hi, Kristen. I am super excited to be here and to have this conversation with you today.
Awesome. Okay, so let's dive into our first question, which has become kind of my new signature question for this season. Can you tell me about a pivotal moment in your life that sort of led you to this moment and where you're at today?
You know, a pivotal moment in my life that led me to where I am as the Boldness coach, it happened when I went through a divorce. So I went through a divorce, an unplanned divorce, something that I had not seen coming per se, but that's how life is, right? It doesn't always give you notices, doesn't give you warning signs. And after that process, I really felt like I had lost something in myself. I felt like I didn't really know who I was. And I felt like, where do I go? Where do I start? What's next for me? And as I was pondering some of those deep questions, I was also thinking about what other women may be having a similar experience that a life event triggered them into. And I started thinking, if I'm having this experience, I'm sure other women are having this experience too. And during that time period, I was really blessed to be surrounded by a community of supported women, friends, colleagues, in essence, a sisterhood. And they helped me, by being my sounding board to really kind of ponder the depth of those questions and really think about the answers, the possibility that could come out of those questions. So that led me to becoming the Boldness coach, because I don't ever want another woman on this planet to feel disempowered, from a major life experience. And that's what led me here today.
I love how you turn that really hard situation, which divorce is incredibly difficult, into something that is not only empowering for yourself, but empowering a whole community of women to not minimize themselves and just to be their big, bold selves. I love that. And so we're really here to talk about communication. And can you tell us, how does that factor into, I know you're so highly skilled, and if you all go onto her website, she does a lot of different things in terms of how she coaches people in the corporate space. She coaches entrepreneurs. How does communication fit into your coaching and the services that you provide?
Communication is really the foundational gateway to any type of interaction that we have. There's verbal communication, there's nonverbal communication. We're always communicating. So whether we know it or not, we're communicating. It's easy to see that with other people. It's hard to see it with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's also hard to see it when you are communicating, with the environment around you. So in that essence, we would call that vibrations, when we are, communicating with the environment around us. But it really is the foundation and the gateway to interacting with others. And the number one most requested area of training that I get is around team building, leadership development, professional development, and just so on and so forth. And the culminator of all of those is communication. How are you talking to other people? What are you saying to other people? Or what are you not saying to other people? What are you saying to yourself? What are you not saying to yourself? What is your essence, your energy communicating to other people that perhaps is nonverbal and that you may not be aware of it? And when we step back and really assess how we're showing up in the world, from the perspective of how we communicate with people, it becomes an eye opener for us. It becomes ahas. And it also becomes the opportunity to say, wait a minute, is this really how I want to show up? Is this how I want people to experience me? Is this what I want to experience back because of how I'm showing up?
Yeah, and that makes so much sense that, communication is sort of the foundation to how you're really coming into these spaces and helping, to facilitate, better relationships, really. But I what you said about the energy, as an introvert, it's very hard to walk into a room and not pick up on everyone's energy, so that you're always picking up on the what's not being said, right? It's like what's being felt. And also I appreciated what you said about not only what are you saying out loud, like communicating to others, but what are you communicating to yourself, and what's that internal dialogue? So there's so many pieces to this. I wonder if we can start with some examples on different communication styles.
Absolutely. So, and I'm going to start with self first, because that's really the foundation that I start with. All the work that I do is really self-awareness. And, there are just different communication styles. Is what are you saying verbally to yourself? How are you talking to yourself? And we've been conditioned in society, Kristen, to really just negate the vibration of words. We just say, oh, what they say, if you talk to yourself, you're crazy, and so we've been conditioned to adopt that. That's not true. When you talk to yourself, you really are in communication with yourself and you're connecting with yourself. You have the best and the most truest and right answer for you. Nobody externally has a better answer for you than what you have for yourself. Now, whether or not you want to own the truth about that, that's another conversation. But talking to yourself and how you talk to yourself will elicit a vibration that helps you to then move in particular ways in how you interact with other people. And so that's really important, is to look at the verbal communication that you're saying to yourself. The other part is the nonverbal communication. So our face, is a book. It's a page, should I say, in our book of life. And it's how you show up with yourself. Are you smiling at yourself? Are you rolling your eyes at yourself? Are you, the energy that you have, your posture, all of that sends communication back to you about how you think and feel about yourself. And remember, it's the vibrational energy that's out there. There's also, where you have aggressive communication, where people could be trying to push their point across, aggressively, not listening to other, individuals, not taking in any other opinions. There's passive aggressive, That you could say something, but verbally you might not say it. But visually you say it. Or verbally you say part of it, and then visually you say the rest of it, through your physicality of it. Um, there's also implied communication, so implied meaning that it looks like you're agreeing. It looks like you want to say something, but you didn't say, anything. Of course, there's the written communication. There's a lot to be said in the way that we communicate, the vibration from that in writing. I mean, there's been different types of examples where if you're angry, with a colleague, with your boss, you just write everything out, and then you go back and erase it to get it out. There's communication styles through the emails. So I think we can just kind of rest in the foundation that communication is always verbal or nonverbal, but we can go a little bit deeper in terms of what communication style is coming up for us based on that particular experience that we're having.
Yeah. And I like how you started with us, right? Like it does start with us, because whatever we're communicating or saying or not, or projecting, or, in our tone or in our body language, that's the sort of the step one, right? It's like, okay, wait, first of all, how are you showing up? And that's going to affect what kind of reaction you get. And then that leads to the whole, what is the interchange going to be like? Can you share some strategies around, how to have meaningful conversations where there's opportunity for everyone to be heard? I'm thinking, especially when it's maybe a challenging situation, or you have to build like consensus. And also the part B to that, and maybe it's like a two-part question is, and this is more personally for me, is like how to not take on people's feelings. Because I know as an empathetic person, that's really challenging. So I know it's a big question.
So I'll start with the latter one. It's how to not take on people's feelings. And what's really important when you want to address, have a conversation around a topic that's really important, that's really crucial, that you really want to find a way to work out, whatever that needs to be worked out. It's really important to just recognize that, right? The level of importance that particular situation will have. The other part, in terms of not taking on anyone's feelings or the other person's feelings, is to really, compartmentalize where this is coming from and what is this possibly really about. There are times when people may communicate a certain words, language, and energy, on a topic, but it could be a buildup of something else, something prior to them engaging. It could be something that they've been holding on to and that they haven't released from prior conversations, or again, from someone else. So there's an opportunity for both parties to say, okay, what is this really about? It's never about the topic that's on the table, especially if you're angry. It's never about that topic. That topic just kind of perhaps maybe a trigger, to really what is really going on. So when you recognize that this is possibly about more than what I'm thinking. So let me approach this with the level of openness, and let me not assign it. Because when we assign our feelings to something, then when you give it a word, when you give it a phrase, when you give it some meaning, you start to take on that assignment and embody it. And when you do that, then now you are being preemptive with your communication. Well, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to do that. It's important to be mindful to not assign the experience to a feeling, because there's more information that is required for you to get clarity on. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess I'm thinking of like maybe a situation that feels charged or tense. How do you stay open and not assign
Yeah.
feelings.
And I think this can lead into the part about colleagues, right?
Mhm.
Um, I'm sure you've heard this. I've heard this before where people feel or have an experience that they worked on a project and another coworker stepped in and claimed the project. And that person was feeling like, wait a minute, I put blood, sweat, and tears in that project. And then all of a sudden, my boss passes it on to you. You get to present it and you get to get all the glory on it. So I'm sitting back in the room and I am seething because I know it's not true. I know it's my information. So, I know the facts, right? And I don't say anything, Kristen. I just kind of take it in. I get frustrated. Then I go home to my family and my friends. I go home to partners, and now I am just firing off because I didn't take the opportunity to address, a really critical moment, at work. And when I don't do that, then guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to assign it some feelings, assign emotion to it. I'm going to take it on. And now I'm going to embody that internally and it's going to spill over in other places, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now let's say that has happened because I get that a lot from clients. And you get wind of that this person is going to be presenting your presentation. This is a perfect opportunity to, have a difficult conversation, with your boss and with the colleague. And what I would encourage you to do is before you have that difficult conversation is really sit down and think about what's the end goal that you want out of this conversation? What is the end goal? And what could others also walk away from the conversation? How can we be able to find a way that's agreeable for everyone to get what they want out of this experience and out of this conversation? That can be tough in all honesty, because you may be thinking, well, it's my project. I put the blood, sweat, and tears in it. Why do I have to share it? Well, we're in a work environment and there's a larger goal at play here. The larger, or should I say a larger objective? The objective is we are working with the company towards them reaching their goals. And all of us have to contribute, on some level. So that in itself helps to take some of the personal connection out of it, that there's a larger objective here that you're striving for. But also, you want to try and create a win-win where possible for everyone involved. So what I tell clients to do is before you go into a meeting, really think about what is the outcome that you would like to see at the end of the conversation. How can you, give to other people in the conversation? How can you support them with the win, out of the conversation? And jot that down, journal it out. So that way you have a chance to really put it in writing and express exactly what it is that you want. And when you're documenting, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want, then ultimately what comes up, Kristen, is the real want that you desire.
Yeah.
And so if the real want is, I want to be seen, I want to be recognized, then that is what you put in part of the conversation. Versus, well, I'm mad because you took the work. And what I want you is to not take my work. That could be a true aspect of it, but what's really the need that you're after? And when you journal this out and write this out and flesh this out, you're thinking about yourself, think about the other person too. What could the other person possibly want out of this conversation? If this person is presenting, is there an agenda that this person has that may be important to be aware of? You don't necessarily know that answer, but what you can do is write an open-ended question. Open-ended question to your colleague. So you are presenting my work that I put together. My question to you is, what benefit are you seeking from presenting the work that I've created, that I've produced? That person, you might find out, I didn't want to present. The boss told me to. So right away, you can, it can diffuse potential conflict between you and that other person, because that person had nothing to do with, they were assigned to present. They might have even said to the boss, I really don't want to present Kristen's work. She's worked so hard on this. And then when you also look at the boss and you ask that question of the boss, what would be the goal for having Kristen to present work that I've really worked hard and produced. What's the goal that you're looking for from this? And that person might say, and Vaneese, you get a lot of floor time. That's your jam. You are so great at that. And what I'd like to do is to give everyone the opportunity on the team to present, to find, their pathway on this team. And, hearing that answer, the person, me, Vaneese, saying, calling the meeting, I could say, these are really interesting answers that I had never considered. And to be honest, I want to share with you what my experience was when I got the news. Now, two things I want to point out here. One is I didn't say what my feelings are, because in all honesty, people can't control your feelings. Now, they may influence it, but ultimately it's you that will assign a feeling. The other part is experience. When I say experience, I can actually connect the dots to what is happening or what has happened. I can actually give it some factual context. That is what can become part of the core of the conversation, is speak from facts, not from feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and this takes some practice. I know I'm just kind of giving an overview, and I don't want to Pollyanna this and say, oh, do this and everything will be okay. Even as a person that does communication strategy work, I have a regular life too. And sometimes I forget. However, knowing now that I know that there are some options that I can choose from around communication styles, now that gives me pause so that I could say, well, wait a minute, what's really going on here? And sometimes when I ask myself that real question, I find out that it's really not an issue, or that I've made it an issue when it really wasn't one.
Yeah, you've given us so many things in there, and I want to kind of highlight them. So first of all, approaching these conversations with a win-win attitude. It reminds me of being in partnership and in a marriage, right? It's like,
yes,
that's very important. It's not a, I'm going to win and you're going to lose, right? You're both going to lose if that's how you approach it. But yeah, going into things with the intention of, I want to win, I want you to win. And that's such a different energy, as opposed to, you hurt my feelings and I'm going to get my way so that I feel better, or I think I'm going to feel better. And you mentioned like journaling. Like, I love that prep time, right? Sometimes when you get caught up in the moment, you can forget like, oh, there are things that I can do to prepare myself for the conversation.
Yes.
Just like speaking, I spoke at a conference and I had to do all this preparing of myself. And that was like, that was journaling, and that was listening to music to get me in, a better mindset. And so it reminded me of that, of like, yeah, when you're going into something that can be difficult, or you just don't know what the outcome is going to be, journaling, I love that as a practice. And then you talked about open-ended questions. They give everyone space to continue forward, and you're not creating like a block because you kind of shut things down with, the way you approach a conversation. So all of those are so powerful. Are there certain phrases, or maybe you have some go-to sentences that you say that help to facilitate better conversation? Like anything in your toolkit where you're like, this is kind of getting maybe away from me, or I want this outcome and I want to get us closer maybe to a win-win energy. Are there things that you use that commonly that you find helpful?
The open-ended questions are always, my go-tos, and I encourage others to do that as well. The situations, there's so many variables in a conversation. So there isn't like one specific way, but I do highly encourage to have open-ended questions so that you are inviting sort of a dance in the conversation. So it's not one way, it's not led by that person. and you're feeling like or experiencing that there's no place for me to voice my opinion, my thoughts, my concerns. I just got to take what you say. And when that happens, when there is no two-way and it's just a one-way street, people shut down on the other end of the conversation. And now that's being internalized. And guess what? I'm going to assign it something. I'm going to assign it a feeling. So all of my sensibility just went out of the window. But when you ask, open-ended questions, I'm curious about what you're sharing. Would you mind telling me more about that? Would you mind telling me what your experience was? But before I go any further, I want to step back and say, bring some compassion before the open-ended question. So, Kristen, I really apologize that was an experience that you had of me. And I would like for you to tell me more about what came up for you during that experience. Would you mind, sharing with me what impact that had on you after that experience? When we put some compassion before the open-end question, we're giving them space to acknowledge, and really be vulnerable in what they're about to share. And we're saying to them, I do care about your feelings. I do care that this is uncomfortable for you. Another thing that I like in conversations is asking permission. I think that's another important component that sometimes we overlook. So thank you, Kristen, for sharing, and enlightening me, because I was really curious about that. Do you mind if I share with you my experience? And then you say, well, sure. So now what I'm doing is, by asking your permission, it allows you to mentally be in an open mental space of receiving, or perhaps in a space where curiosity can peak in you in the conversation. So it's still a bit of a dance. So, approach it with some compassion or acknowledgement, have an open-ended question, and then ask for permission in the conversation so that you invite the other person in to openness so that they can hear what you're sharing.
Yeah, I love those examples and just kind of hearing you speak them. And you make it look so easy. And then the permission, I do love when people ask me for permission. I feel like respected. I feel safe. It gives me that agency to continue in the conversation or not. So I love those examples. Those are goals for me. I'm like, someday I'm going to just nail it and have these conversations.
What I'll add to that, Kristen, again, I'm human. This is what I do for a living. And in my personal life, sometimes it gets away from me. There are times when I've gone back to apologize. And especially, in the dating world, there are times when I've gone back to past dates and I apologize. I mean, I think there was one gentleman, it had been maybe 6 or 9 months since he and I had talked and had been on a date. And I called him one day and I said, I would like to apologize to you. And I'm not sure if you'll accept it, and it's okay if you don't, but would you mind if I did? And then he says, not at all. And, I expressed to him and shared to him and just said that the experience you had of me, at that particular period was not really the experience I wanted you to have. And, you had it because of what I was going through. And I apologize for putting you through it in that way. And I wanted to say that because I wanted you to know that I saw and I heard you. My ego got in the way. And he was really blown away. He was like, wow, I don't think I've ever had a woman in the dating scene to come back and apologize. And I wasn't doing it for the effect of that. But it really just wasn't sitting well with my heart. That, especially once I started to realize, what did I really want? And when I journaled and discovered what I really wanted wasn't what was communicated, and I looked at what was communicated, I'm like, ooh. And I thought about too, I would want, like you said, you felt seen and heard and safe. I want that going forward in my dating experiences. So in order for me to, call in that experience from the universe, then I get to be the experience first so that I can model, this is what I'm looking to experience. So you take that into other interactions in your life, family members, friends, work, and it's not always easy. But as you continue to be mindful with the practice, you will ultimately start to embody aspects of it. And you go back, like you said, and how did that feel when I said that? Oh, that didn't go so well. Oh, that went well. I want to keep trying that. And you just learn ultimately a new behavior if it's what you're really interested in.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what I'm hearing in your example is that you're able to be vulnerable. And that is such a part of communication that is challenging.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, how do you get to that vulnerable place of like, I am going to reach out to this person that I didn't sit right with me, that I went on a date with. I mean, that feels so brave and bold to me. So how do you get to that place?
I want to be a better human being in this human experience. So going back to the self-awareness, part is, what do I want to call into my life? What are those experiences I want to have when I'm interacting with others? And what's the role that I play in inviting those experiences into my energy aura? So I think that's something that we get to think about, because a lot of times what worked in the past may not work at this point in your life. And you are not the same person who you were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. So I think it's important to recognize your own evolution and your own journey of growth. And if you want something more expansive in how you interact with others, then you get to look at, well, what role do I play in inviting the expansiveness into my life with others? The other part of vulnerability is it comes with self-trust and self-truth. You really do get to have the conversation with yourself about, this worked, this didn't work. I showed up that way, and I wasn't trusting, myself. So because I wasn't trusting myself, I was operating from a place of fear. So you have to really, again, tell yourself the truth. The other part is I'm blessed to have a good network, of friend girls who I can call and say, listen, this is what I said. This is why I said it. Tell me what you experienced on the end of me sharing with you what I said. And they give me honest feedback. And as a big girl, I'm like, okay, I'm here for it. Sometimes it's like, oh, well, ouch. And then sometimes it's like, okay, all right, that's what I thought. That's what I told myself. And then I say, okay, is there an opportunity to go back, and to be open? And I do tell the person, and I have told the person, this is not an easy conversation. So I'm asking for some grace, as I tell you this. And what I mean by grace is I'm asking to suspend judgment, and really hear with your heart, not with your mind, your head, and what I'm saying. And at the end, I will accept the feedback that you give if you want to give feedback.
There's a couple of things there. I agree with you in terms of when you look at your relationships, what kind of relationships do you want to have? And how are you helping to facilitate those relationships? What is your role? And yeah, the vulnerability piece and the self-trust, that's a huge thing. I think, a lot of women have a very self-critical voice, and that, messing up, that feeling of messing up, or I have to come back and, say sorry or acknowledge it. That can be a struggle. And which kind of leads into my next question of, when we have those disagreements with people, how can we build bridges? And then also, how can we be okay with, like, this is just we're not going to come to an agreement. Because sometimes it's not even just what is said, it's that our experiences of the same thing are so different
yes,
that we are not going to come to a consensus.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And thank you for bringing this question up, because I'll say this, as women, we've really been conditioned around our feelings. And I mean, this is longer than any podcast you and I could ever record, right? Because we have to go all the way back in time in history, that we've gotten these messages from just society around us. And so that within itself is really challenging when society has said you should be this way and not that way. So that makes your communication right there, just really, go down to bare minimum, other than yes, no. So I really want women to give themselves some grace and knowing that it really does take a level of boldness, and boldness is about courage, to find your voice and to take a position, so to speak, about what's right for you. It takes a level of boldness, courage, to be vulnerable in a conversation with an openness that we may not come to a consensus on what it is that we're talking about. And asking yourself this really important question: will I be okay if we just don't come to a consensus? Will I be okay if we agree to disagree? And if we agree to disagree, what impact will that have going forward on our relationship? And when you get to ask these questions of yourself in advance in your preparation of your conversation, and if that becomes the reality, I think you'll have a different experience if you've already really thought about that could be highly a possibility. And am I going to be okay with that? Could that possibly turn into a reality? It's when we go in with the single-minded track saying, this is what I want, it has to be this way, I'm not open for another agreement or, option on this. It has to absolutely be this way. We're setting ourselves up for a disappointment.
Yeah, it's like being open to all outcomes and not really attached to anyone and just being okay. I had an experience last year and it ended up being kind of a surprise. I had one experience and this person had the other, but we were doing the same thing together. And at one point I had to realize, oh, we are so diametrically opposed that we're never going to get to holding hands and that's kind of what I want. You know what I mean? I tend to, I want not everyone to be happy, but I dislike that people would have had a maybe negative experience.
Yeah. Sometimes I think that's really smart and brave though, to understand that. And I applaud you for saying that, we're just diametrically opposed to it, and be able to say, you know what, it's okay. I'm acknowledging your experience and you're acknowledging my experience, and that could be the way that we leave it. So let's see where we can come up with another agreement. So going forward, the agreement, you put an agreement on the table, and the agreement could be, we're going to part our ways, and this will be something that I will be curious about for some time now, or I will no longer be curious about it. I will accept this answer and we'll move on. Or the agreement could be, we will acknowledge that there are going to be times when we're going to be opposed to each other. And we agree to talk it out and try to get through it as much as possible, and then we move on from there.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to really define, the next steps of a relationship if things just don't come out the way that you're hoping that they will come out.
Right. I want to respect your time. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your just fantastic tips around just being a good communicator and kind of just, being a little more, it feels like it's a little more fearless and just stating what you need and being open to others and being more compassionate. Can you tell us what your superpower is before you leave us?
My superpower is two things. One is being a good storyteller, because I love using my experiences in life to help others to see a possible pathway, for them in building courage. And I also am an enricher. So I enrich the lives of people that I come in contact with. So those are my superpowers.
Oh, I love that. And I can definitely see that. And then also, please let people know where they can find out more about you or where they can just connect with you.
Yeah, I invite all the listeners to connect with me. You can find me under theboldnesscoach.com. And I think Christian is going to have some notes, show notes for you on that. I also have some links that have freebies to them. So that you can stay in touch. There is a self-love guide that I've shared, and also the link to my bi-monthly newsletter where I share nuggets there as well. So, and then also I have a Facebook group for women only. It's called the Bold, Big, Bad Sisterhood. So I look forward to connecting, with your audience a little deeper, but also just having conversations and resources and experiences that can enrich their lives to the next level.
I love it. Well, thank you again so much for being here, Vaneese. You've been such a fantastic guest.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show. So if you found this episode really valuable, I'd love for you to head on over to Instagram and share your big takeaways, any aha moments that you had, and tag me at Podcast and Amplify. If you have any questions, make sure to hit me up in the DMs. And if you have any friends or fellow entrepreneurs who you think would get a ton of value from the show, make sure to share this episode with them. Your recommendations and your reviews are really what help grow this podcast, and we are always so grateful for your support. Always remember, your voice and what you have to offer is needed in the world. Until next week, take care.